The most widely published book in human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Franson. Today's episode is Courage to Heal.
Hello, everyone. It's Wade Franson, and this is Created in the Image of God. Today's show features a very fascinating lady, Pam Evischi. I met Pam online through the producer and was fascinated by her story, in which she focuses on healing, but not healing in the traditional sense. Healing of the soul. And she has a unique journey and a unique story that I wanted to share with you today. Welcome to the studio, Pam.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here, Wade.
Well, and I'm really excited for this topic. I don't think I've really covered this with my audience, but my wife and I, and even our children, sometimes have this little project that we started over 2 years ago. We were invited by a woman from the Bahamas who's in a nursing home to talk about the Bible. And she was praying that a spiritual family might be formed. And her prayers were answered because more and more people from that nursing home came and joined that topic. And we decided to talk about the soul. What is the soul? And we pulled writings from all the world's different religions, and even some secular quotes to just see what people have said about the soul. People all around the world, different times, different religions. And this led to just a fascinating unfolding. And we call this little group now our spiritual family. And because it's a nursing home, we've had several people who have passed on to the next world during the course of these 2 years. And just this discussion about the soul and preparing for that rebirth has just been eye-opening for me and amazing. So when I read about you and the healing of the soul, I thought we have to have Pam on the show. But as we always do, let's start talking about your soul and where you were planted on this planet and your family background as we normally do on this show. So tell us a little bit about who was Pam Evischi before she took conscious thought to become who you are today.
Well, Pam Evischi was born Pam Jones, so that was a lot more easy to swallow. But I was born into a small town Midwestern family. There were three other siblings, and just your everyday average, middle class, working hard family. Parents had their own business, and all the kids helped with that. And my dad
which Midwestern area, which state were you in?
In Illinois, a little town called Centralia. Yeah.
Okay.
My dad was a ex-college football athlete.
Wow.
He played at Mizzou. And so he was a teacher and a coach for a lot of my formative years. And then him and my mom had their own business later on. But I had a lot of influence from him, from if you can imagine a coaching dad, you know what I mean? He was a very loving dad, but we had a lot of
What's funny, I don't know, have you seen that movie Radio? We just watched that as a family, where that coach takes on this African American boy who's developmentally challenged, handicapped, and takes him under his wing. It's just this heartwarming, amazing story. And there are many stories like that about coaches, right? Was it anything like that?
It was to a degree, because he was very loving, and but he was very tough too. His expectations were high of himself, so high of his kids also. I know one of his, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. That's like, like was his mantra, so he was encouraging, but he was also very like authoritative, like a coach would be. And yeah, so I will say he was great with kids, and he had so many, of his players that looked to him as a father figure, because he was like really had great character, and was just an all around guy that helped develop character in his athletes.
But was it tough sharing him with all these other kids?
In some ways, as I grew, I mean, when I was little, I didn't really, understand, because he was gone, for coaching events and stuff. And I think my mom probably thought it was tough trying to raise 4 kids when he was gone so much. But as I grew older, I recognized it was kind of a weird dynamic, because, and I think it was indicative of his era too. Like the emotional intelligence wasn't there very well for his family. So it was easier for him to be closer to people like his students and his players, because it wasn't so intimate. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and also, you have a specific role and a specific
Mhm.
allotment of time, and you don't
Mhm.
have to deal with all the noise and the nitty-gritty detail of what that entails. You would give them the coaching session. They would go off and work it out on their own or not with other
Yeah.
people, and you didn't have to get involved. But it's sort of like that, yeah, I get it completely.
Yeah. And like I said, he was still very loving, but there was just
Yeah,
that level. And that's my perception, because if you ask my
sure.
brothers and sisters, they might have, you know,
But how did
a
that
different
impact you?
perspective.
How did that, shape you as you began to then realize and find your own way? What was there baggage? Was there positive? The twin pillars of, a pillar is holds up the building, but it also casts a shadow. Is the analogy I like to
Yeah,
use.
yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. There was, if I could just backtrack and say, like, you could probably not have picked the best. I could not have picked the best parents. They were just from the worldly standard, just
Yeah.
salt of the earth, great parents, very loving. But as I grew older, and started doing, no parents perfect. And they passed along a lot of what I call generational bondage from their family heritage. And it wasn't like anything. A lot of people think generational bondage is like alcoholism or sexual perversion and all those kinds of things. But there's so much passed down, just belief systems that aren't healthy, and habits that aren't healthy. And so I picked up a lot of those, because I was daddy's little girl and his angel. So I looked up to my dad like a god. And so I probably was most affected of all the brothers and sisters by his stuff.
Humanity. His
Yeah, it's
humanity.
like his humanity, and
Right.
the stuff that he, now I recognize the stuff that he was hurting from, because I had to go through it and heal it in myself. So
I think it bears saying here, and my audience knows, a lot of my story. I've been very open in my book, People of the Sign being the first one. I experienced alcoholism, divorce. Not my mother was an alcoholic. My uncle that I lived with in Sweden, after the kidnapping and being taken to a foreign country and separated from both parents, he was an alcoholic. So yeah, there's all that. But what really helped me and saved me, and the guiding light, was the 5th commandment: honor your father and mother. Media wanted to buy my story and from me or my sisters, and they would have told it there would have had to have been a villain, right? Or both villains, and
mhm.
didn't want any part of that. Didn't want to. The Bible tells these stories, warts and all, about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? And their family. Jacob's brothers threw him into a pit and he was in
Yeah.
Egypt. Those stories help me. It's like, well, if it happened to those people and they're in the Bible, who am I to complain, and look at it positively. But then somehow through it all, honor your father and mother, a commandment with a promise. And in those really dark teenage years at age 16, when I literally wanted to kill my father, literally, that's not even an exaggeration, plotting it, that commandment brought me back to sanity. And like, I'd only be hurting myself,
Yeah.
to be selfish about it, plus obviously. And no, that turned it around. And I worked really, really hard to develop a relationship with my father despite all this stuff, right? And he was doing the best he could. He did what he thought was right. And so, but at the same time, you have to reflect on this. You have to sort of, with God's help, work through it to move to a better place, even as you recognize a lot of things happened that shouldn't have, whether they were minor or whether they were major. Some of the things that you mentioned, I was never physically abused. I was never sexually abused. Those things, I can't even imagine how horrible.
Yeah.
But I had other kinds of sort of psychological abuse and trauma and abandonment and all that stuff, right?
Yeah,
That you got to work through.
Yeah,
So this gets into the whole soul, right? How it impacts your soul. So then bring us up to speed then as you were working through that, coming to become an adult and so on.
Yeah. So kind of where the shifting point for me, because like I said, since I was a daddy's girl and he had very high standards, I also had high standards for myself. And I kind of was like this people pleaser, rule follower, and then my church upbringing just reinforced all of those traits of, having to be good or else you're gonna go to hell, all that kind of stuff. In my little mind, that's how I took it, and I'm sure that if you look, churches are like, well, we didn't really say that, but in my little mind, that's how I was taking.
Yeah, but they kind of did.
Yeah, well, yeah, and to like the unworthiness factor that was always spoken over you.
Well, it
still continues to be spoken over almost every church I ever go into. That is a running theme. So, I had a lot of that. So I just overcompensated with positive attitude and putting a smile on my face, stuffing feelings, because of course, when your parents are emotionally unintelligent, you don't have very good emotional intelligence either. Right. So when I was 33, married with 4 little kids, I just had a breaking point, just a hard time in my marriage, and kind of went off the rails, so to say, for a little while, and was kind of mad at my church, mad at God, mad at my parents, kind of like just in the pit, for lack of a better word to say. And kind of like saying to God, here I am. I go to church every Sunday. I do everything you tell me to do, read my Bible, pray. I'm a good I'm a good person. I treat people kind. And this is, this is what I get, it's kind of like that, that kind of attitude. And what I realized, that was the beginning of what I call the dark night of my soul, where now I kind of understand where my soul was like, okay, you cannot continue living in this vein anymore because it's damaging you. Those ways served you as a child, but now we're going to do some healing work on you, and we're going to drop you low so I can raise you up and reteach you. So that's kind of where my transition started when I was about 33. And,
oh, wow.
And in my book, that kind of one of the cool stories was I had a little neighbor lady. It's just an acquaintance, you say hi to her, share small talk every once in a while. But I was on my porch at I guess it was 2 or 3 in the morning, and I was just it's like that devastating moment where you're reading your Bible, you're crying out, and her porch light comes on, and she says, "What are you doing over there?" And I try to act like I'm doing nothing, like everything's great, hi. She goes, "Why don't you come over and visit with me?" And so I went over, and then she began to pour into me the God that I was not aware of in church, and like a bigger, an out of the box kind of experience with God, and started reminding me that there's like a whole team, that I have a whole team just waiting to help me, but I have to ask. So she kind of started becoming my mentor and teaching me tools that helped me for the first time experience God rather than just believe in this God that I had heard about, and those kinds of things. So she actually brought the experience to me, which was a big aha moment for.
Yeah, and I think that's a great moment to pause as we go into the first commercial break. And I've just got to throw out there, I'm reminded of, I think it's Timothy or Titus, where it talks about the older women taking the younger women under their wing and showing them the way, right? And it sounds like that's what happened there. So when we come back, I'm going to ask a follow-up question from earlier on, and then we will move forward. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back to learn more about Pam's journey and what it means for you in the healing of your soul.
There comes a moment when the noise fades and your soul whispers for something greater. A longing for love, for peace, for understanding, for connection. Spiritual Springboard invites you into a journey where the divine meets you exactly where you are. Discover a God more loving, playful, and creative than you ever imagined. Through simple yet powerful tools, this guide will help you create a life filled with miracles, healing, and grace. Step into the hands of love. Step into your next chapter. Spiritual Springboard. Available now.
Welcome back to Creating the Image of God with Pam Evischi. We were just talking about her transition from having, as it says, I think it's in various places in the Bible, I'd heard about you, but now I know about you, talking about God. And Pam had that moment in her 30s when a neighbor woman sort of took her under her wing. But right before that, I wanted to know, your late teens, did you get married? What happened between the, that sort of awareness that your dad wasn't perfect that we were talking about, working through the family bondage, I think you called it, and then on to the 30s. So what happened between, let's say, 16 and 33?
Between 16 and 33. Well, in that, really from early as I can remember till 33, I was still so entrenched in being who my parents wanted me to be, and just morphed into that person. And again, I want to backtrack here before I say, because I love how you said honor your parents, because even, I've always honored my parents. And even in the awakening moments where I'm realizing that they, inadvertently put stuff on me as a kid, I still honor them because they had the same thing happen to them. And I think people don't recognize that it's like passed on from generation to generation. And I know like today, especially, we have all these young people who are just, what's the word they're just cutting off their parents because of family drama or whatever. And they're just not talking to their parents anymore. And I'm like, that's really detrimental. Obviously it hurts the parents. It's not respectful of the parents, but it really hurts them more. Kind of like you were saying with your father, that that's the point of their growth. And so when they cut off the parent, then they cut off their growth.
Well, it's kind of funny because there's a lot of talk about narcissism today, right? And pointing the fingers at supposed narcissists, right? And maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But that it's the old saying, when you point your finger at someone, there's three pointing back at you. It used to be common sense, right? But yeah, today it's like blame any and everybody. It's going back to the Garden of Eden, nobody taking responsibility, Adam blaming Eve, Eve blaming the serpent blaming God or whatever, and God holds all three accountable.
Yeah.
And nobody holds anybody accountable today. Oh, it's always, always a lot of empathy that, yes, you poor thing, you really are a victim and it's all somebody else's fault.
Yeah.
Nobody takes personal responsibility. Everyone thinks they're perfect and they're a victim. And whatever is making them unhappy, it's somebody else. It's not them.
Yeah. No, I
And so
totally
honor
agree.
your father and mother is like a basic principle there. You don't get to blame your parents.
Yeah.
Because that leads to blaming God, right? Why
Yeah.
did you make me thus? God says, don't ask why I made you the way you are. You're
Yeah.
created in my image, and you were created good and perfect. Figure it out.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I'm a big proponent of self-responsibility and taking personal responsibility for your life, for the condition of your soul, because in the end, that's what God asks us to do. It's not like putting the blame game, but
Yeah.
so I
So was
kind of
there a
segued back.
relationship? Was there a relationship, a marriage maybe that happened
Yeah,
between
no,
that?
I got married. Yeah, I got married to um my I will say he was probably really my first boyfriend, even though I would have maybe a boyfriend for a week or something. But he was my first boyfriend, and so we dated a while and ended up getting married and having four little kids. And so I just stepped into that role that I was kind of raised to be. In our family, the girls were supposed to get married, have kids, find a job that was suitable to helping raise kids. That was kind of how, and a woman in our family, that's what we were kind of supposed to raised up to do. So that's what I did. And I'm grateful for that, because I don't have any bad feelings about doing that. But yeah, so I just followed kind of in line of what everybody wanted me to do, because I was very non-confrontational, didn't want to rock the boat kind of person. So I just did it, until, and it was not a bad choice by any means, but it did come with challenges down the road when I started waking up a little bit, and God started.
Was that challenging for your husband then as well? When because sometimes people grow apart, sometimes they grow closer during those challenges.
Yeah, no, at that time, we were growing apart and started having marital issues. And to be honest with you, I broke my bond of marriage I was mostly angry, and I'm not making an excuse for why I did that, because it was wrong. But then I was so devastated by that, because that was so out of character for me. And fortunately, it was a one-time situation. No one knew about it except me, pretty much, So, but the guilt and all the stuff that goes with that was just, I felt like the world's worst, by doing that. So, yeah, that's kind of what led to my fall, per se, in the dark night of my soul, was just having to deal with my choice and why I did that. And
well, it's
and
part
being
of
so
an
alone.
awakening. We talked earlier about everybody thinks they're perfect and it's all somebody else's fault, but true repentance comes from recognizing that I am the sinner.
Yeah. No, and so it was perfect for me, because obviously when I was such a strict churchgoer and rules follower, and if you would have asked me then, that would be the last thing I would ever consider,
Right. What did, along with that, and I know from my own experience, even though I knew that this was completely wrong and I worked very hard to avoid it, there's a lot of ambient judgment of others. There's a lot of ambient arrogance, sometimes overt judgment of
Yeah.
others. And
Yeah.
and I've I've tried to share over the last 30 years. No. Satan is the accuser of the brethren, right?
Yeah.
You don't go there. Jesus said, do not judge with a reason. That's the work of the devil, is to judge other people. And God is the judge, and you don't usurp that role or that authority. And Jesus came to humble himself and esteemed others better than himself.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a hard lesson.
It was a hard lesson. And two, I recognize, like, which we'll talk about later, but I think your church upbringing a lot of times accidentally makes you judgmental.
Yeah.
But I wasn't outwardly judgmental.
Right.
And I didn't even recognize I was, but of course there was something there for sure.
Yeah.
So anyway, but so that's kind of like the build up to my fall.
So out of this though came the desire, and in your sort of little bio it says that you heard a voice from God about writing a book, and you thought, I'm not worthy. Who, me? What, me?
Yeah,
Are you kidding?
yeah.
Tell us about that experience.
Well, that happened like during my soul, like when I started recognizing about healing the soul. I was living in Nashville, Tennessee at that time. And I had written my first book, which was kind of a book from the woman how she mentored me. So I had written a book about that. And I kind of did it just kind of like, well, I'm going to write this down because this information was so valuable to me. I want it to be able to be helpful to other people so they could actually experience God. So I had written that one, but I really didn't figure that I was an author or even think that was necessarily something God wanted me to do. I just did it. Well, then maybe 5 years later, I was woken up in the night and was asked to write another book. And I sat there and argued and was like, I'm not an author, and I was given the title. And then when I was given the title, it was called Courage to Heal. I started arguing, saying, I'm not a doctor. I have no medical background. I have no credentials, yada, yada. And I was told, I'm going to show you what I want you to write. And then I woke up like petrified, thinking that I was going to be struck down with some kind of disease or something to give me the experience. But God had other plans, and he started awakening me to soul healing, and took me on a 3-year crash course to heal my soul.
So tell us a little bit about the mechanics of that, how it works. Describe it for us. What is that? People might think of some kind of exorcism, right? Which is not at all what you're talking about. But what does that look like? What does it entail?
So basically, if we can go kind of into the perception that we're all here for a reason. It's not that we're not just randomly here, and we've all chosen to be here. I call Earth and Earth School, because we're coming here to learn, because that's in heaven and everything's perfect. So, there's not a lot of learning going on up there. So if we want to come down to experience life and learn, and maybe use the word ascend.
That's actually fascinating. Let's pause there for a moment. Not a lot of learning going up there, because I actually agree with that. So the analogy that I like to use, and I had Max Stossel on the show recently, who did this little vignette about the 2 children in the womb, saying, do you believe in life after delivery? Do you believe in mom? Can she really exist? Why hasn't anyone come back from there? And the analogy is that in the womb, look at how much growth. You take this, this little sperm and this little egg and a couple of cells, and then boom, boom, boom. Within weeks, you've got a heart, you've got lungs, you've got eyes, ears, all this stuff, all this growth happens in the womb. Mm-hmm. And once you're born, we grow bigger. We learn, we do learn things, but that kind of, and even when you're a little kid, you got that super learning phase, right? Where you can learn 5 languages, in the first 5 years of life, and later in life, you can't learn 1, right? Yeah. So, I think it is like that. I think the intense learning now, God says, I will, then those that loved God spoke often with one another. And I will remember you in the day when I make up my jewels, and jewels are formed under intense heat and pressure. And whatever
Mhm.
flaws there are makes them unique, right? Some little
Mhm.
impurity in the environment makes that jewel unique.
Mhm.
So yeah, I agree with you that in this life now, it's super learning time in preparation for the next life, the next world.
Yes, yes. And I
So,
like to
but
call it like,
where do you tell me a little bit about your perspective on all that?
well, I'm along the same lines, and like I kind of look at it as like your purification of your soul while you're here, and the goal is to generate more love in your soul. So, because I mean, we can look at this in different ways, but Jesus is love. And so if he is in us and we're made in his image and likeness, then why? And he says, you can do all the things, same things I do,
And more,
and more
greater things.
greater than. And I'm like, okay, so why aren't we doing it? That's my logic, is like, okay, so what's getting in the way of us stepping into our destiny as God's kid? And what I've been shown and learned is it's the darkness of our soul. So through the purification process of life, um, if we choose to step into growth, what starts happening is that the light, I call it resurrecting Jesus within you, his light starts rising and rising more and more. And whether you like the word vibration or ascension or consciousness, you actually start raising up to where God is and his uh, thing. And I mean, for me, the crazy thing was like all those years in church, I tried to be the good girl, tried to follow the rules. But whenever I started doing soul healing, it was like, I don't have to try anymore. I just be it. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely,
You just
absolutely. I
start,
mean,
you just become it.
you think about the transition from from Moses to Jesus, and the Beatitudes, right?
Yeah.
Jeremiah, I think it is, says, he will magnify the law and make it honorable, put it under a microscope, really understand how it really works, and also a telescope, big picture, right? How it really works, and understand the inner workings of the law so that Jesus could say, well, they're just two commandments: love God and love your neighbor. But
Yeah.
but then those teachings, they're not wrong, obviously. In the Mosaic Law, the Ten Commandments, I spend a lot of time in the book of Genesis, and I spend a lot of time thinking about the Ten Commandments. I'm talking right now and writing about thou shalt not bear false witness, because all of media is constantly bearing false witness today. They're all telling a story and a narrative and a spin. They're
Mm-hmm.
selecting facts, they're twisting facts. We've had all these pictures recently, supposedly, of starving children in Gaza that are actually children with diseases, that they're not emaciated because they're starving, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's misrepresenting reality in terms of political goals and agendas. And this is just a stench in the nostrils of God. Thou shalt not bear false witness. Honor your father and mother, right? Have
Mm-hmm.
no other gods before me. Whatever conception you have of God in your head, it's an idol, because we don't really know God. And you're talking about getting to know God on a deep level, the vibration, the soul, yeah, I'm 100% in tune with you. Keep going. Sorry, I don't mean to
Yeah.
dominate.
No. No. I like how you segued into all that. So I kind of look at like my life as the teacher, and so what God showed me is like, and he's so kind because he gently will heal your soul. It's not, of course, he dropped me low at my awakening because he needed to get my attention, but just in life, I find that whenever something's going on that we don't like, that most people either fight it, they run from it, or they ignore it. But when we do that, we're missing a growth opportunity, because if something's showing up in our space, that is kind of like the Holy Spirit, God saying, okay, here's an opportunity for you to grow and heal something within yourself that is no longer serving you, a way of being that's no longer serving you. So that was kind of like the idea basis of what he started showing me, and started having me look at my life and what was going on, and bringing people into my life to challenge me where I needed to be challenged, to awaken me to things that I didn't even know was inside me, to so he could heal it up. And even like sometimes he would just give me a dream that would be an eye-opening experience, or have me meet, I called it divine appointments, where he set me on a divine appointment and someone would just say something and it would just pierce my soul. So those, those kinds of things started happening once I got on this 3-year crash course of healing. And it's amazing because even though I was raised by such wonderful parents, the amount of healing I needed, I was like, whoa, I would have never dreamt that I had so much, within me to heal. And I think about like people who really have like tough circumstances, and how much they would just be, their burden would be lifted if they would step into the healing journey, even though it's, challenging, because you have to face yourself. That's the crux of it. And you can't blame, I can't blame my parents for how, I have to take responsibility. And the great thing is, once one person takes responsibility for their healing, they give people around them permission to heal. And for me, I feel like I've put a stop to some of the generational patterns that were passed down, from my grandparents to my parents. And now my kids are more freed up, so they don't have to pass that same stuff down because of the awareness of how harmful some of those things were. If that makes sense.
Awesome. It totally does. We've got to go to a quick commercial break. We'll be right back and pick up right where we left off. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Pam Evischi and Healing the Soul.
Meet Dr. Lori Schessler, a licensed clinical Christian counselor, speaker, and author with over 25 years of ministry experience. She's the founder of New Leaf Christian Counseling and holds a doctorate in clinical Christian counseling, bringing both depth and compassion to the work she does. Dr. Lori specializes in temperament therapy, a personalized, biblically grounded approach that helps people understand their emotional design and heal from the inside out. Whether working with children or adults, she helps individuals uncover the root of their trauma, anxiety, or relational struggles, and guides them toward lasting transformation. Her voice is warm, grounded, and deeply insightful, perfect for conversations around faith, mental health, emotional resilience, and identity. As someone who bridges spiritual truth with practical tools for healing, Lori offers meaningful value to listeners seeking clarity, hope, and change. An inspiring and thoughtful presence, Dr. Lori brings the kind of depth that makes every conversation feel personal, purposeful, and full of grace. Contact her through the website newleafchristiancounseling.net.
Welcome back to Created in the Image of God with Pam Evischi. Today, talking about healing the soul. Right before the break, she was sharing, so much about what it means to heal the soul. And what I had is this analogy that's maybe useful, and that is our heart is like a mirror that can reflect back the light of God. Jesus talks about rivers of living water, but we have to purify our own heart and our own soul to perfectly reflect back God and to give to others. And you were just talking about when one person makes that change to heal their soul, they allow others in their life to heal. Tell us a little bit of, we're not going to have time to go into all the mechanics. We'll have to have you back on the show to go into more detail because this is great. But tell us maybe one example of how that works, whether it's yourself or somebody else you've worked with, where once they get to that dark night of the soul, as you called it. And by the way, this is a concept that's in literature, and honestly, I think the whole enlightenment, and I'm gonna go off now, and I'm sorry, but real quick, for centuries, people were condemning each other to hell within the church, right? Catholics, Protestants fighting wars. And we talked about the work of Satan, which is accusing and judging other brethren, right? Condemning each other to hell based on picky little doctrinal differences, right?
Mhm.
So then you have the Enlightenment where we come out of that. But what that led to was many people abandoning God and religion altogether. And you didn't do that. And you talked about your awakening. Right. So at a macro level, I wanted to bring that out for the whole world and where we're at as a world, as all the nations of the planet. But at an individual level, how does that work when you talked about one person and their awakening and giving permission to the people around them to also heal?
Mhm. Well, I just believe that, dang, it's just such a fascinating thing, because once you step into that healing journey for yourself, you are just freed up from so much bondage and ways of being that are just detrimental. And I will say that this might bring up a whole nother issue later, but even the darkness of our soul allows for manipulation of the unholy to be in our lives more prevalent than if we're healed up. So, like you said, the voices and the accuser, when we don't heal, that is on us 24/7. And so as we heal, we kind of shut the doors, and the shed blood of the lamb, and the living water starts healing up those holes, like per se, of the dark holes that the unholy try to get at us, get to us and manipulate us from. So a lot's going on when you start healing. You start putting up like, hey, I'm not going to have that manipulation in my life anymore. So
Yeah, you tell the whispering serpent to get lost.
yeah. So, and just imagine, like, if you are a parent and you have this whispering serpent on you all the time, how is that going to affect your relationship with your kids? And how are you going to respond to them in ways that aren't necessarily the healthiest for your kids? So when you start healing, that serpent influence, falls away. And so then you can be more of the parent, a more healthy parent for your kid. And then you're not passing down those serpent ways, and having that serpent influence on your kids. That's an example of one thing. But I know for myself, like with my kids, they were a little bit older as I started on my healing journey, and I just started seeking and kind of like you said, I sought God, but he was leading me down all kinds of avenues. I mean, science, philosophy, what the church would call new age, spirituality, and in so doing, this great, bigger experience of God unfolded from that. And so from there, my kids were actually able to experience some of the stuff that God was showing me as I was sharing with them, and he was giving them similar experiences. So, it's kind of just like that one, it's kind of a ripple effect. So you say, you throw a rock in and the water ripples out. So that's the same thing with healing. Once that one person heals, it starts just rippling out. And I know the church is really big on saving souls, but I'm like, the soul that needs saved is the one right under your nose. And if everybody would take personal responsibility to save their soul, just imagine the ripple effect that would have on the world.
Well, one of the things that I use to describe is, and I gave a sermon on this years ago. I'm a former minister. I resigned in 1995 from the full-time ministry to separate my faith from my paycheck. But one of the sermons I gave while I was still there was, what is the work of God? What is the work of the devil, and what is our work? Let's differentiate these things, right? It is the work of God to save souls. That's not our work,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Our work is to love.
Yes.
The sign of a true Christian, John 13:35, by this shall all men know that you are my disciples, that you have love one for another. That is our job, is to simply love. It's not our business. God is perfectly capable of saving souls, and we are perfectly incapable of saving souls.
Yes, yes, I agree. And by all means, I heard so much when I was doing my healing work. Um, like in you think you're being helpful to people, but you're really enabling people a lot of times. And he was like, what right do you have to play God? Like in a situation where my kid was like having a problem and I would come in there and be like trying to fix, the mom thing, try to fix their situation. And he would be like, what right do you have to play God? And you're interfering with what I'm doing in their life. And so it's kind of the same thing, like you're saying, our job is just to love, and his job is to save their soul. And sometimes, most of the time, when he's doing soul work, it's not pretty. They're going to have to go through some stuff.
Well, he says, God chastens every son whom he loves. There's this famous story about this person named Abdul Baha, who a woman came to him and was telling him all of her troubles, and he just looked at it and he said, God must love you very much to have given you so many trials.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think and maybe that's why people are a little bit afraid of soul healing is, to have to face yourself and face all of that is very hard. But with God's grace, I mean, as you know, with God's grace, you get through it. And for me, especially once I started on that soul healing path, and he kind of gave me a recipe, so to say, it was once I started in on that, like I would have be a devastating couple of days after he brings something to my awareness. But as I worked with that tool more, it would be like 30 minutes, awareness, healing, cleansing, boom, let's move on. So it was like, he was so good and gentle in how he brought things to my awareness, and then how he worked through the process with me. And the more I got into it, it was just amazing how he would bring stuff in, and then in like 30 minutes, we worked through something that used to take me 5 days or a week to work through.
Well, and I know that the audience, like me, is wanting to know more details, specifics, mechanics, steps, the 12-step program of soul healing, which I don't know if that exists, but I know you can get into a lot more detail. And we're going to have to save that for next time. So I'm going to issue a prophecy here and say that we're going to have Pam back on probably next week. She and I will have to create another time together to pre-record that. But we've just gotten to the tip of the iceberg of this deep, deep, important subject. And Pam, I'm honored to have met you. I can't wait to learn a little bit more about how some of these insights came to you, why God is giving these specific insights to you, and what's next for you, where are you going to grow next, and how are you going to share them. So I think, though, for today, we've just got a lot for people to chew on and think about, and we'll have to have you back very soon. But are there any words you'd like to leave with the audience as we wrap up for today?
Yeah, I believe I would just like to leave you guys with this. Like, there's nothing special about me to where God has given me this information or taught me these things, but more that he loves you just as much as he loves me. Maybe the only difference between maybe some of your listeners and me is that I was willing to step into the journey of soul purification and kind of step into the fire with God, because I wanted to go deeper. And I know it's easy to stay in the shallows with God, but if you're willing to go into the deep, that's where the free waters flow. And that's when you get to have some really cool experiences and actually know, just physically know how much he loves you, even though he already loves you that much, but you actually get to experience that for yourself. So it's simple. It's simple. God's pretty simple. It's nothing any tough. So
wonderful. And you've said it so well. It's it's not the tagline, whatever is the closing comment that I always give on this show, and that is that you are created in the image of God, and God loves his creation. Thank you for reminding us of that, Pam, and we will have you back hopefully next week.
Okay.
What I have to do now is air the sneak peek, which may well be Pam again or not. I don't know. I can't predict the future to that degree, but we'll see. We will definitely have you back. So thank you for tuning in today, everyone, and stay tuned for the sneak peek of next week's show, and we'll see you there. Hello, everyone. It's Wade Franson, host of Created in the Image of God. I am back with another sneak peek. This time I have a beautiful woman, a lovely lady in the studio from South Africa. This is despite the fact that she had trauma in her earliest childhood that scarred her visibly, causing her to be on a life's path full of challenge. She's written a book called Scars That Propel, and we're here to talk about her and her journey. Welcome to the studio, Virginia.
Thank you, Wade. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure, and we've just met, but I already feel like I've gotten to know you deeply as you shared your personal story. And I could relate because of some of my own trauma, which was very different in the details, but in terms of the nature of it, it was very similar in how I felt estranged and different from other people and couldn't relate to them early on and often felt like I didn't belong. Tell us about those earliest experiences that you have memory of when your scars caused you to have challenges with other people.
I was always the other kid, misunderstood, never welcomed, and that just put me on a margin outside of the rest of everybody, and I didn't appreciate that. I started asking questions, why me? So yeah, that really created a curveball in my life.
Well, and we'll get into this deeply in the show itself, but you worked through those challenges, and today you feel, as you shared with me, that these have helped you really draw close to God in a way that would possibly not have happened had those experiences not happened.
Yeah. It has, Wade. It really has drawn me so close to God. The fact that I'm alive still today means, for me, it meant that God's not done with me. I still have a purpose, and he has a plan for my life. And that is the big realization that made me draw closer to God, because I want to live for him as he's always been with me. Yeah.
Well, and as you can hear from Virginia's accent, she's in South Africa. So we're going to pre-record this show due to the time zone difference, and it will be airing next Sunday morning at 7 a.m. Central, 8 a.m. Eastern. You do not want to miss Virginia Solomon's Scars That Propel. Be prepared to fall in love with this beautiful woman at that show. We'll see you there.